2.5 tons. That is the average stone in the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now picture 2.3 million of those stacked into a single mountain of rock, the heaviest ones near the bottom weighing as much as a loaded truck. They lined the whole thing up with the North Pole so precisely that modern surveyors had to double-check their own instruments. And they did it without a single wheel that worked on sand, without one iron tool, without a crane, a pulley, an engine, or anything you would call a machine. Copper, rope, wood, and water. That was the entire toolkit. So here is the part nobody tells you. The story you got in school, thousands of whipped slaves dragging stone under the sun, is mostly wrong. We know that now. And the thing that finally cracked the mystery open was not found inside the pyramid at all. It was found in a cave by the Red Sea, and it was written by a man who was actually there. I will get to him. But before I do, I want to stack a few things on the table so you know what is coming. There is a physics trick these builders used, proven in a lab in 2014, that cut the effort almost in half, and it is so simple it is almost insulting. There is something satellites spotted under the desert in 2024 that explains why the pyramids sit exactly where they sit. And at the very end, I am going to answer the question that actually matters, which is whether a human being today, with the same tools and nothing more, could ever pull this off again. I am saving the strangest part for last on purpose, because once you see how they really did it, you cannot unsee it. If you want to make it to that part, hitting subscribe is genuinely the only reason a video like this shows up for you again instead of getting buried. Now let me ruin a myth. Start with the slaves, because that image is burned into all of us. Charlton Heston, cracking whips, sand, and misery. In 1990, a tourist was riding near the plateau when her horse stumbled on a low mud brick wall. They dug. What they found was a graveyard. Not a mass pit, but actual tombs, laid out with care, right in the shadow of the pyramids. People in those graves had been buried with bread and beer for the afterlife, the same offerings a respectable Egyptian got. Archaeologists Mark Lenner and Zahi Hawass kept digging and uncovered a whole lost town next door, a place we now call Hayt el Ghurab, bakeries, breweries, sleeping quarters, and bones. So many animal bones that the estimates suggest they were slaughtering enough cattle, sheep, and goats to feed something like 10,000 workers a day. You do not feed prime beef to slaves. You feed it to people you need to keep strong. And we know what they called themselves, because they signed their work. Deep inside the pyramid, in chambers never meant for human eyes, the crews scrawled their team names in red paint. One gang called itself the Friends of Khufu, another the Drunkards of Menkaure. These were proud, organized labor crews rotating in shifts, probably farmers working off a duty to the state during the months the Nile flooded their fields and there was nothing to plant anyway. So if it was not the whip that built this, then we are left with the harder question: how do you actually cut a mountain into blocks when your sharpest metal is soft? Because copper is soft. Run your fingernail down a wall right now. Feel how little it takes to scratch a painted surface and how your nail does absolutely nothing to the brick underneath. That is roughly the gap between a copper chisel and a block of granite. For the soft limestone that makes up most of the pyramid, copper chisels and wooden mallets were enough, slow but enough. But the pharaohs also wanted granite, the hard red stone, for the inner chambers, and the nearest granite was at Aswan, hundreds of kilometers up the river. Copper cannot cut that. It just bends. So they cheated in a clever way. To shape granite, workers pounded it with balls of dolerite, a stone even harder than granite, beating the surface into shape hour after hour. And to drill and saw it, they did not rely on the metal at all. They dragged a copper tube or a copper blade back and forth, and they fed wet quartz sand into the cut. The metal was just a guide. The sand, harder than the granite, was the thing actually doing the grinding. It is the same principle as sandpaper, except the sandpaper is the desert, and the patience is measured in months. All right, you have cut the block, now you have to move it, and you have no wheels, because a loaded wheel on soft sand just digs itself a grave. So they put the stone on a wooden sledge and pulled, and for a long time everybody assumed it was pure brute force, more rope, more men, more sweat. But there was this one detail on the wall of an old tomb, the tomb of a nobleman named Jehutihotep, that nobody could explain. It shows a giant statue on a sledge, dozens of men hauling it, and right at the front, one man pouring water onto the sand in front of the runners. For years, people shrugged and called it a religious ritual. Purifying the path, it was not a ritual. In 2014, physicists at the University of Amsterdam published a study in Physical Review Letters where they actually tested it. They built a miniature sledge, loaded it, and dragged it across sand at different moisture levels. Dry sand piles up in front of the runners and fights you the whole way, but add the right amount of water, not too much, and tiny bridges of water form between the grains and lock them together. The sand goes stiff. It stops bunching up. Their measurements showed the pulling force dropped by about half. Half. That man in the painting was not blessing anything. He was the guy running the most important piece of equipment on the entire site, and we mistook him for a priest for over a century. Now, dragging stone across flat, damp sand is the easy part. Here is the problem that should be keeping you up at night. The quarry and the building site were not on the same patch of ground. The fine white limestone for the outer casing came from Tura, across the river. The granite came from Aswan, an 800-kilometer haul. You cannot drag a 70-ton block of granite 800 kilometers across a desert, no matter how wet the sand is. So how did the stone get there? By water. And this is where 2024 rewrote the map. A team led by geomorphologist Eamon Gonim used satellite radar that can see through sand, plus deep cores of sediment drilled out of the ground, and they found the ghost of a river, a branch of the Nile, about 64 kilometers long, that dried up and got buried under farmland and desert thousands of years ago. They named it the Ahrimat branch, from the Arabic word for pyramids, and when they traced its old path, it ran right along the foot of more than 30 pyramids, including Giza. The pyramids are not randomly scattered. They are lined up along a vanished waterway like houses along a street. The builders floated the stone on barges and parked it almost at the base of the construction site. The river did the heaviest lifting before a single human ever picked up a rope. And we are not guessing about the boats, because one of those boatmen left us his diary. In 2013, a French team led by Pierre Talet was excavating an old harbor at a place called Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast. Inside the caves, they pulled out rolls of papyrus. These turned out to be the oldest inscribed papyri ever found anywhere on Earth, and one of them was a logbook kept by a middle-ranking official named Merer. Think about that for a second. We have the day planner of a guy who worked on the Great Pyramid, written in his own hand 4,500 years ago. And it is so ordinary, it gives you chills. Merer was an inspector. His job was to lead a crew of about 40 men, sail up the Nile to the limestone quarries at Tura, load the boat with white casing stone, and ferry it back down to the pyramid, which he calls Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. He logged it in half-day shifts, loaded the boat, sailed, spent the night, round trip, roughly 4 days. If he were alive today, he would basically be posting his delivery route. Day 3, picked up stone at Tura, weather good, crew fine, headed to the pyramid. It is the most boring, most human document imaginable, and it is the single best piece of evidence we have that this was a massive, calm, well-run supply operation, not a fever dream of suffering, which leaves the last and worst problem. Getting the stone to the site is one thing. Getting it nearly 150 meters up into the air is another. The pyramid originally stood about 146 meters tall, taller than any building humans would make for the next 3,800 years. There were no cranes. So how did the blocks go up? Honestly, this is the one part we still argue about, and I am not going to pretend it is settled. The oldest idea, going back to the surveyor Flinders Petrie, is a single long ramp of mud brick and rubble running up one face, with the slope getting longer as the pyramid got taller. The problem is that to reach the top, that ramp would have to be almost as enormous as the pyramid itself, so others proposed a ramp that zigzagged up the side, or one that wrapped around the outside like a spiral staircase. Then in 2007, a French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed something stranger. He argued the main ramp was built inside the pyramid, spiraling up within the walls, which is why we have never found the giant external ramp anyone would expect. And just recently, in 2025, a paper floated the idea of counterweights sliding down internal shafts to haul blocks up the other side, like a stone elevator powered by gravity. We do not have the final answer. We have a building so good it erased the evidence of how it was made. What we do know is how absurdly precise they were while doing it. The base of the Great Pyramid, covering more than 5 hectares, is level to within just a couple of centimeters across the entire footprint. The 4 sides are aligned to true north within about 1/15 of a single degree. They hit that with knotted ropes with a 3-4-5 triangle to make perfect corners, and almost certainly by watching the stars wheel around the night sky to find true north. No compass, no laser, no GPS, just rope, water, shadow, and the sky. So after all of it, how did the Egyptians build the pyramids with no machines? Here is the real answer. There was a machine. It just was not made of metal. It was made of people. The machine was the organization itself, a vanished river to carry the stone, a government that could feed 10,000 workers a day, trained crews that took pride in their gang names, a physics trick with wet sand, copper, dolerite, quartz, and 20 years of relentless, well-fed, well-managed effort. No aliens, no lost laser technology, no magic. Something far more impressive than any of that, which is what a focused human society can do when it decides something must exist. And that question I promised you at the start, could we do it again today with only their tools? The answer is yes, in theory, and that is exactly what makes it greater, not smaller. It was never beyond human hands. It was just beyond human laziness. They simply refused to quit. If this rewired how you see that thing in the desert, that is the whole reason this channel exists, and subscribing is what tells me to keep pulling these threads apart. Because here is the part I did not tell you. In 2017, scientists pointed muon scanners at the Great Pyramid and found a hidden void above the Grand Gallery, a space the size of an airliner that no human has entered in 4,500 years. Nobody knows what is in it. That is the next one. I would stick around for that.